The side door was unlocked the way I always left it. I came in quietly, my bag still on my shoulder, keys in my hand. I had left my neighbor Dolores's house earlier than expected. She had company coming, and I did not want to overstay. So I came home. Through the side door, into the hallway that runs past the dining room toward the kitchen. That is when I heard them. Men's voices. Laughter. The particular looseness of a room full of people who believe no one is listening. Corbett's friends. I recognized Marcus's voice, and Dwayne's, and the low, steady one that belonged to a man they called Stretch, who I had fed at my table more times than I could count. And then, Corbett. His voice above the rest. Easy? Certain. The voice of a man completely at home. I stopped walking. I heard my name first. Just my name, the way you hear your own name before anything else, even in a crowd. Then I heard Corbett say the rest of it. Vivian is a fool. Her twin sister and her kids own everything when I'm gone. They're the real family. The laughter that followed was not cruel. It was comfortable. The laughter of men who had heard this before or something like it, and had long since decided it was not their business to question it. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I just held what I had heard and let it settle into me the way cold water settles, all the way down, finding every space. My name is Vivian. Vivian Ashcroft Malone. I have been married to Corbett Malone for 25 years. I cooked for this man. I raised his children. I kept his house and held his name and built a life inside this marriage, the way you build something you intend to last. 25 years. And in 25 words, he had just told his friends exactly what those years were worth to him. Then I heard Corinne's name in my own husband's mouth, and something else moved through me entirely. Not my sister, my twin. The woman who shares my face. The woman who has sat at my table at every Christmas, every birthday, every Sunday dinner for 25 years. Looking at me with my own eyes. I did not unpack it there in the hallway. I could not. I noted it the way you note the exact moment a bone breaks, precisely, without flinching. And I filed it somewhere I knew I would return to. If any of this feels familiar to you, if you have ever stood in a hallway and heard something that rearranged everything, stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from, because this story is just beginning. I walked to the kitchen. I stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard. My garden. The rose bushes I planted the second year of our marriage because Corbett said he liked roses. The vegetable bed I maintained every spring, my hands on the cold edge of the sink. When Corbett appeared in the kitchen doorway a few minutes later, his face was warm and easy. "Didn't hear you come in," he said. I turned and smiled at him. "Just got in," I said. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." He kissed my cheek, went back to his friends. I turned back to the stove. I watched the pot. I heard him laugh at something in the next room, full and unbothered, the laugh of a man who believed he was safe. I picked up the spoon. I stirred, and I began to think. I got up Friday morning and made his breakfast. Eggs, toast, the coffee he liked strong with 1 sugar. I set the plate in front of him the same way I had set it in front of him for 25 years. And I watched him eat without looking up from his phone. And I thought, he has no idea. Not a flicker. Not a single adjustment in the way he held his fork or reached for his cup. He kissed me on the cheek when he left, the same cheek he always kissed. And I stood at the door and watched his car back out of the driveway, and I did not move until he turned the corner. Then I went to work. I checked patients in. I pulled files. I answered the phone with my professional voice, warm, efficient, unbothered. And I scheduled appointments and processed insurance forms, and made a fresh pot of coffee at 10 o'clock the same way I did every Friday. My supervisor said I seemed quiet. I told her I had not slept well. She nodded and moved on. That was the only crack I allowed all day. It was the drive home that opened something. Not grief, not panic. Something colder and more useful than either of those things. I drove the same route I had, driven for 11 years, and I let my mind do what it had been waiting all day to do. Go back. Not with tears, with a pen. The kind you hold in your mind when you are finally ready to mark what you missed. Corinne, always available when Corbett needed something handled quietly. I had called that loyalty. I now had a different word for it. The year Corbett came home from a trip to see Corinne's mother and walked through the door wrong. Off, in a way, I attributed to exhaustion, to stress, to the 1,000 reasonable explanations a trusting woman keeps ready. The year's money felt tight while his business was doing well. Explanations that never fully added up, but that I accepted because I had no reason not to. And the way Corinne looked at Dessa and Kashan sometimes. Not with an aunt's warmth, with something measured, something that kept a careful, practiced distance. I had mistaken it for her personality. I now understood it was her guilt wearing a familiar face. I was not spiraling. I want to be clear about that. I was building. There is a difference between a woman who is falling apart and a woman who is taking inventory. And I knew which one I was before I pulled out of the work parking lot. I did not cry. I did not call Corbett. I sat in that parking lot for 4 minutes and I called Bertrice. I said, I need to see you tonight. Not, something happened. Not, I don't know what to do. Just those 7 words, flat and certain. The way you speak when you have already decided the next step and you just need the room to take it. Bertrice said, I'll be home. An hour later, I was sitting in her living room. I laid it out from beginning to end. The side door, the hallway, every word Corbett said, the laughter, Corinne's name, the will, the children. Bertrice sat across from me and listened the way she always listened, not waiting for a pause to respond, but actually listening. Her eyes steady, her hands still. When I finished, the room was quiet. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she could not believe it. She looked at me for a long moment, and then she said 2 words. Patricia Odom. No hesitation. No explanation. Just the name. Delivered like she had been holding it in reserve, waiting for the day I would finally need it. Living with someone who does not know you know is its own particular discipline. Saturday morning, Corbett made pancakes. He does that sometimes on weekends. Stands at the stove in his undershirt, flour on his hands, pleased with himself in the easy way of a man who considers cooking occasionally an act of generosity. I sat at the kitchen counter and watched him and said the right things at the right times and ate what he put in front of me. Underneath that, I was completely somewhere else. He left around noon to run errands. The moment his car cleared the driveway, I was already moving. Home office, filing cabinet. I started with the tax returns, joint property, my name on everyone. I was entitled to every page. I photographed them systematically, folder by folder, my phone steady, my hands steady. Bank statements from the shared household account. Property documents I recognized. I was not reckless. I was not rushed. I moved through that office the way I moved through my workday, efficiently, without drama, leaving everything exactly as I found it. It was the hanging file labeled MISC that stopped me. Behind a stack of old utility receipts, a piece of letterhead I did not recognize. An attorney's name I had never heard Corbett mention in 25 years of marriage. The letter referenced the drafting of estate planning documents and requested Corbett's signature by a specific date. I checked the date. 3 years ago. I photographed it, noted the attorney's name, replaced it exactly. Then I saw the envelope behind it. Old. The paper had that particular yellowing of something kept rather than discarded. Not tucked loosely into the drawer, but flattened carefully beneath older documents the way people preserve things they cannot publicly display, but cannot bring themselves to throw away either. The postmark said 2007, and the handwriting on the front, my name, our address, made my breath stop in my chest, because it looked like mine. The specific slant of the letters, the way the V curved at the bottom, the looping H. Corrine and I learned to write sitting side by side at the same kitchen table in our mother's house. Our handwriting had never fully separated. I opened it. The card said nothing explicit. The words were careful, grateful, warm, the kind of intimate that only exists between people who share something they have agreed never to name directly. It was signed with a single C. I stood in my husband's office holding a card that looked like I had written it to myself. From my own hand. About my own husband. I stood there for a long time. I did not call Bertrice. I did not sit down. I photographed it, replaced it exactly where I found it, closed the drawer, and walked back to the kitchen. Some things you have to carry standing up. That evening, Corbett took me to dinner. An early birthday celebration, he called it. He was warm across the table, attentive, easy, the version of himself he deployed in public. Midway through the meal, he mentioned casually that he had already texted Corrine about the party. She was coming Saturday, of course. She was family. Of course, I said. I watched his hands on his wine glass. I watched his mouth forming her name. I thought about the card with my handwriting that was not my handwriting. And sitting there with my fork in my hand, the restaurant noise around us, I made a decision about what that party was going to be. Monday morning, I checked a joint savings account we had opened years ago and rarely used. The balance was wrong. I pulled the transaction history. Regular transfers, small enough individually to overlook, consistent enough collectively to mean something, going back years. To an account number I did not recognize. I screenshotted every page. 18 years of transfers. Not large enough to trigger the kind of automatic banking attention that comes with reckless movement, but steady enough to build an entirely separate financial life quietly beside mine. I had the account number. Now I needed to know where it went. Patricia Odom's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. She was a small woman, compact, precise, the kind of still that makes you feel like she is always measuring something. She shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and sat down without small talk. I appreciated that. I laid everything on her desk in the order I had gathered it. The photographed tax returns, the account screenshots with 18 years of transfers, the attorney letterhead with the name I did not recognize, the photograph of the card postmarked 2007, signed with a C, written in handwriting that looked like mine, but was not. I talked for just under 20 minutes. Patricia did not interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she opened a legal pad and began. She told me that under Alabama law, specifically Alabama Code Section 43-8-70, a surviving spouse has a statutory right to an elective share of the estate, regardless of what any will says. Corbett could not simply write me out entirely. Whatever he had drafted with that attorney 3 years ago, the law already limited how far he could go. Then she clarified something carefully. Corbett was alive, which meant we were not contesting a will in probate court yet, no matter how much of this centered around the estate documents he had prepared. Right now, the legal exposure was different. Concealment of marital assets, possible fraudulent transfer of property interests, and financial structuring designed to move marital resources outside my reach without my knowledge. The transfers were a separate matter. If the account those payments went to belonged to Corrine, which the pattern strongly suggested, And if those transfers could be proven to have come from marital funds, they qualified as possible dissipation of marital assets. Patricia said she could subpoena the account records once formal proceedings began. The total, once documented, could become part of any future marital accounting or settlement negotiation. She asked about property. I told her what I could recall. Corbett mentioning a commercial property reorganization years ago, something about restructuring his interest with a business partner. She wrote the partner's name when I gave it. She said that if the transfer moved marital assets without my properly documented consent, it could constitute fraudulent conveyance or improper transfer of jointly protected marital interests. She would need to pull the deed records before saying more. Then she raised something I had not expected. She said, carefully, without drama, that if Corrine had a child fathered by Corbett, and if Corbett had structured financial arrangements specifically to benefit that child, while concealing the relationship from me, the court's view of intent changed entirely. It was no longer simply a man making unusual private choices with his money. It became a documented pattern, a hidden biological relationship, long-term transfers, quiet asset movement, estate structuring tied to concealment. That, she said, was a significantly stronger position. I sat with that for a moment. Before I stood to leave, Patricia asked me one question. She set her pen down and looked at me directly. What do you want the outcome to look like? I did not answer immediately. I thought about the card in that hanging file. I thought about Corbett's voice in the hallway saying my name the way you say the name of someone you have already dismissed. I thought about Corinne's face across my own dinner table. 25 years of her face across my table. Then I said, I want my name on everything he tried to quietly move away from me. And I want everyone who was in that room Thursday night to know that I knew. Patricia looked at me for a moment. Then she wrote something on her legal pad and said she would need several days to begin pulling records. I drove home in the dark. Wednesday. The party was Saturday. 3 days. Patricia had told me clearly, no public confrontation before preliminary filings were prepared. The strongest position was a quiet one. Any scene before the paperwork was organized could complicate everything later. I told myself I would follow that advice. I told myself that twice before I pulled into the driveway. I woke up at 6 that morning and I knew. Not planned, known. The way you know when you have finally stopped negotiating with yourself and arrived somewhere solid. Patricia had told me not to. I understood every reason why. Public confrontations create noise. Noise creates complications. And I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Corbett sleep through the half-open bedroom door, his chest rising and falling, completely unbothered, completely safe in the life he believed I would never disturb. And I thought about 25 years of understanding why. 25 years of waiting for the right time, the right moment, the right conditions. I was done waiting for conditions. I was going to do something my attorney told me not to do. I was at peace with that. The caterers arrived at 2. I directed them through the house the way I had directed everything in this marriage, efficiently, without complaint, making difficult things look seamless. 40 chairs, 2 food stations, a bar set up near the back porch, flowers on the entry table. I had ordered all of it weeks ago, before Thursday, when I still believed I was planning a birthday party. Now, I moved through the setup and felt nothing about the effort because the effort was no longer for Corbett. It was the stage. Every chair placed, every tablecloth smoothed, all of it in service of something he did not see coming. By 7, the house was full. I was the perfect hostess. I circulated. I laughed. I accepted compliments on the food and thanked people for coming, and refreshed drinks and touched arms, and smiled the specific smile of a woman completely in control of the room. Corbett was at the center of everything, warm, expansive, the man everyone in Birmingham believed him to be. I watched him work the room and felt something I had not expected. Clarity. Clean and total. The way the air feels after a storm has finally broken. Corinne arrived at 7:30. I greeted her at the door. Her eyes found mine immediately and asked something. A quick, careful assessment. The kind twins exchange without words. I gave her nothing back. Not coldness, not warmth. Nothing. She moved into the room and I watched her find a position near the back and stay in it. In my bag, 3 printed photographs of account statements. 1 photograph of the card, postmarked 2007. The joint savings account statement showing 18 years of transfers. And a handwritten list. Rennie's birth year, Olivia's birth year, the year the account opened, the year the deed was adjusted, the year the will was drafted. 1 hour in, I asked for the room's attention. The conversation dropped. 40 people turned toward me. Corbett smiled from across the room, expecting a toast, a tribute, the kind of public devotion he had always taken as his due. I thanked them for coming. I said I had something to share, something that belonged in this room because everyone here mattered to Corbett. Then I laid it out carefully. Not accusations, documents, dates, facts people could read for themselves. The will. Corinne named as primary beneficiary. Olivia named on a life insurance policy taken out in 2007. 18 years of transfers from a joint account to a separate account I was never shown. The card in the MISC file, postmarked 2007, signed with a C written in handwriting that looked like mine. I held up the photographs. I read the dates from my list. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not speculate beyond what the documents actually showed. Patricia had warned me that facts matter most when they stay factual. Even standing there in my own living room, I remembered that. The silence came first. Then the room came apart. Corbett's face was not anger. It was not grief. It was the expression of a man watching something he spent 25 years carefully constructing collapse in real time, understanding with complete clarity that there was nothing, not one thing, he could do to stop it. Across the room, Corinne had not moved. She stood exactly where she had positioned herself an hour ago, and she did not move. I set the documents on the table. I looked at Corbett. Then I looked at Corinne. I said, "I am not a fool." I picked up my bag, and I walked out of my own party. I lay in Bertrice's guest room and looked at the ceiling for a long time before I touched my phone. 47 missed calls. The screen had stopped counting notifications sometime around 2 in the morning and just held that number like a fact. I set it face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling a little longer. Outside the window, a bird was doing something ordinary. A car passed. Sunday morning was proceeding the way Sunday morning always proceeded, indifferent to what had happened the night before in a house 4 miles away. I allowed myself that. The specific quiet of a morning after something that cannot be undone. Just a moment of it. Then I picked up the phone. I called Dessa first. She answered on the second ring. I could hear in her voice that she had not slept either. That particular flatness that comes not from tiredness, but from spending a night turning something over and over, and not being able to put it down. "Mom," she said. Just that. "I know," I said. We stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. Dessa had been at the party. She had stood in my living room and watched her mother hold up photographs and read dates aloud, and she had done the math in real time. The way a 24-year-old woman does the math when she realizes the family she grew up inside had a shape she was never shown. She asked me about Olivia. She asked me carefully, the way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer, and you need someone to confirm it so you can begin deciding what to do with it. I answered her honestly. Not completely. There were things still in motion that I could not say yet. But honestly, she deserved that. She did not ask me why I went to the party instead of letting the lawyers handle it. I was grateful for that. What she said, near the end, was, "I'm glad you knew, Mama. I'm glad you weren't the last one to find out." I did not trust my voice for a moment after that, so I said nothing. And she understood. Kashan called while we were still talking. I told Dessa I would call her back. He was not in the same place his sister was. Dessa was processing. Kashan was burning. His voice had that compressed quality of someone who has been awake all night, with his jaw clenched, and has finally run out of patience for keeping it that way. He said he wanted to go to his father. He wanted to go now, today, and say what needed to be said directly. I said, "Not yet." "Mom." "Not yet, Kashan." I kept my voice level. "I need you to trust me for a little longer." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long?" And I heard underneath that question everything a 22-year-old son feels when the man he measured himself against turns out to be built on something false. I said, "Give me until tomorrow." He said he would try. After I hung up, Bertrice came to the doorway with coffee and told me, quietly, that Corbett's car had been parked outside since around 8 that morning. Not in the driveway. In the street. He had not come to the door. He was just sitting there. I walked to the window and looked at his car. He was inside it, still, not moving. A man sitting in the street outside the house of his wife's best friend because he had nowhere else to go and no version of this he could talk his way out of. I looked at him for a moment. Then I stepped back from the window. My phone rang. Not Corbett's number. Corinne's. I answered on the third ring. I do not have a clean explanation for why. I told myself it was because I needed information, and that was part of it. But there was something else underneath that. Something older than strategy. The pull of a voice you have known longer than you have known anything else. I answered. I did not speak first. I waited. Corinne did not begin with an apology. She began with 1997. At first, she spoke carefully, stopping between sentences as though she was deciding in real time how much truth could survive being spoken aloud. She said his name came to her first, before my name, before any of it. They were together for almost a year before Corbett ever looked at me the way he eventually looked at me. When he told Corinne he was going to ask me to marry him, she walked away. She said that clearly. She walked away. She stepped back before there was even anything to step back from. Told herself that was the right thing. Told herself that was enough. She had done what a sister was supposed to do. She said she stopped answering his calls for months. Avoided places she knew he would be. Took extra shifts at work just to stay busy enough not to think about him. She wanted distance to become permanent before feelings had the chance to turn into something uglier. Then she got quiet for a moment, long enough that I thought she might stop there. Instead, she continued. 2 years into my marriage, he came back to her. She said no. He came back again. She said no again. The third time was 2002. 2 years into my marriage. 1 year before Kashan. The third time, she did not say no. And she told me, quietly, that she had been living inside that yes ever since. I did not speak. I let her continue. She said that when Olivia was born, she told Corbett to choose. She gave him that. A moment of clarity. A line drawn. A demand that he decide which life was real. He chose to stay married to me. He made that decision with his own mouth. Corinne said she had wanted to believe it meant something, that eventually he would do right by one of them completely. He never did. He held both lives in both hands, and he kept holding. She stayed because by then there was a child involved and too many years buried underneath the secrecy of it. Because after enough time passes, leaving no longer feels like one clean decision. It feels like tearing apart a structure people have already started living inside. Not trapped exactly. Entangled. I started to say something, I do not remember what. And Corinne finished the sentence before I could. The way she has finished my sentences since we were children. Since before we had language. The wiring that runs between twins that has nothing to do with choice. It happened without either of us noticing until it had already happened. And then we were both quiet for a moment. This was the woman who knew my voice before I had one. I did not say that. I held it. Then Corinne said, "He never stopped loving you. That's the part that should make you the most angry. He chose you, Vivian. He just couldn't let me go either." I sat with that sentence. I turned it over. Because she was right that it should make me angry. And it did. In a way that was different from everything I had felt before. Not hotter. Deeper. The specific fury of learning that the man who betrayed you also loved you. Which meant the betrayal was not indifference. It was greed. He wanted everything, and he took it. And he called me a fool for not knowing. Near the end, she said, "I never wanted Olivia in the middle of this. Corbett put her name on that policy. I didn't ask him to. She said Corbett did it. Not we decided. Not it made sense at the time. Corbett did it." I noted that distinction the way I had been noting things all week. Precisely, without reaction, filed where I would find it later. And underneath all of it was another realization, slowly taking shape. Corinne still sounded more protective of Olivia than of herself. That mattered. When she finished, I said, "I hear you, Corinne." Then I ended the call. I sat in Bertrice's living room for a few minutes. Outside the window, the afternoon had gone gray and still. I thought about 1997. I thought about Olivia. I thought about the word Corbett. Not we. Corbett. Then I called Patricia Odom. I chose the restaurant. A quiet place on the east side neither of us had reason to frequent. No familiar faces. No one who would carry the evening back to anyone we knew. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where I could see the door. I ordered water. I waited. Corbett walked in, looking like himself. That was the first thing I noticed. Not diminished, not visibly broken, himself. Jacket pressed, chin up. The walk of a man who has decided that composure is the only currency he has left, and he intends to spend it carefully. He sat down across from me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then he began. He did not deny the will. He did not deny Corinne. I noted that the specific intelligence of a man who knows that denial, at this point, would only cost him credibility he could not afford to lose. What he offered instead was a reframe, delivered in the measured tone of someone who had been rehearsing some version of this conversation for years, hoping he would never need it. He said he had provided for me, given me a stable life, never left, never humiliated me in public. He said the situation with Corinne was complicated in ways that predated the marriage and could not be cleanly resolved, as if complexity were an explanation, as if longevity made it reasonable. He said he had always intended to revisit the estate arrangements when the time was right. He said other things I will not repeat, because they do not deserve the space. Then he said, "I loved you. That was real." He said it the way a man says something he believes should settle the matter. Like love was a receipt he could produce that canceled everything else on the bill. I let him finish. I waited until I was certain he was done. Then I asked him the first question. "When Olivia was born, 2006, where were you that weekend?" I watched his face. Something moved across it. Not guilt exactly. More like the adjustment a person makes when they realize the conversation they prepared for is not the conversation they are in. He answered carefully. He chose his words the way you choose your footing on uncertain ground. But he answered. And an answer, however careful, is a confirmation. I filed it. I asked the second question. Did you ever intend to change the will? The silence before he spoke was longer than anything he said afterward. He talked about complexity again, about considerations, about timing and intention and plans he had not yet put into motion. The explanation assembled itself in the air between us, and I watched it and understood exactly what it was. The shape of a no dressed in the language of eventually. He had never intended to change it. When I gathered my bag and stood, he reached across the table, his hand open on the white tablecloth between us, an offering or a plea. I could not tell which, and I did not need to. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. 25 years of that face across tables like this one. I said, Patricia Odom will be in touch. And I walked out. In the car, I sat for a moment in the dark parking lot. Then I called Patricia. I told her what he said about 2006. I told her what the silence before his second answer sounded like. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said 3 words. That's enough. We move Monday. Disa called me at 7 Monday morning. She did not say good morning. She said, Kashawn went to Daddy last night. I sat up in Bertrice's guest room and held the phone and let that land. I had told him not yet. I had asked him for one day. Kashawn had given me until Sunday evening, and then he had done what 22-year-old men do when they are burning and the person they need to confront is 4 miles away. He went. Dessa told me what she knew. Kashawn had driven to the rental property on Caldwell, where Corbett had been staying. He knocked. Corbett let him in. What happened in that room happened without witnesses, and without the careful architecture of strategy. Just a son and his father in a bare living room at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night with nothing between them but the truth. They were both at my kitchen table when I arrived an hour later. Kashawn looked like he had not slept. His eyes had that specific hollowness of someone who went looking for something and found exactly what they feared and came back changed. Disa sat beside him, her hand over his on the table. She looked up when I came in, and something in her face told me to sit down before he spoke. He told me everything word for word. He had asked his father directly about Olivia, not circling it, not building to it, just asked it flat and straight, the way Kashawn has always moved through things that hurt him. At first, Corbett tried to slow the conversation down. According to Kashawn, he talked about complicated situations and mistakes and adult decisions. He said some things were not as simple as they appeared. He asked Kashawn to sit down before making assumptions. The language of a man trying to regain control of a conversation already slipping away from him. Then Kashawn asked him directly, "Is Olivia your daughter or not?" And Corbett stopped talking around it. Kashawn said the room went quiet after that. Quiet enough that he could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Then Corbett said it. "Rennie is not mine, but Olivia is. And I have responsibilities I cannot walk away from." Kashawn repeated it exactly. The cadence of it. The specific way Corbett had separated Rennie from Olivia, as if the distinction made him more honest rather than less. As if drawing a line between the two children was a form of integrity. I kept my face still. Kashawn said, he said it like it was supposed to make me feel better, like knowing which one was his was supposed to fix something. His jaw moved once. "It didn't fix anything, Mama." "I know," I said. Disa tightened her hand over her brother's. Neither of them spoke for a moment, and in that silence I heard everything. The specific grief of two children dismantling the version of their father they had carried their whole lives and trying to figure out what to carry instead. There is no preparation for that. There is no right thing to say into it. I reached across the table and covered both their hands with mine. I did not tell them it would be all right. I did not tell them their father was a good man who made bad choices, because I was no longer certain that framing was honest, and they deserved honesty more than comfort. I told them I was still their mother, that nothing that had happened changed the shape of that I was still standing, and I intended to keep standing, and I needed them to hold on a little longer. Kashan looked at me. His eyes were wet, but he was not crying. He nodded once. Disa said quietly, "What happens now?" I looked at my children's hands under mine. Corbett had finally said Olivia's name out loud to his own son. No paperwork, no attorney, no performance. Just a man cornered by a question he could no longer step around. And somewhere underneath all of it was another thought I could not shake loose. If Olivia really was his daughter, there was a possibility she had spent 19 years living inside a secret she did not fully understand either. I picked up my phone. Nearly 3 weeks after Patricia first subpoenaed the records, she called me Tuesday morning before I reached the office. She did not open with pleasantries. She said the bank had responded fully, and she needed me to come in after work. I rearranged my afternoon and was in her office by 5:30. By then, almost 6 weeks had passed since the birthday party. Long enough for the shock of public exposure to settle into something colder and procedural. Long enough for lawyers to begin speaking to each other instead of through emotion. Patricia turned her monitor toward me and let me look. The account I had found, the one with the transfers I had screenshotted from the joint savings portal, belonged to Corinne. Patricia's office had confirmed the account holder through the subpoena response. What I had not known, because I had only seen the most recent transaction history, was how far back it went. Not 18 years, 21. The first transfer was dated March 2004, 5 years into my marriage. Kashan was 2 years old. The total across those 21 years was $340,000. I sat with that number. Patricia let me. She did not rush past it or soften it with context. $340,000 moved from the financial life Corbett and I built together into an account with my sister's name on it, almost always in amounts small enough to avoid triggering automatic review thresholds or drawing routine banking attention. Never once reckless. The deliberateness of it was its own information. This was not impulse. This was a system. Patricia moved to the next item. Her review of commercial property records had surfaced a 2018 transfer. Corbett had conveyed his interest share in a commercial property to a man named Gerald Reeves at a price significantly below assessed market value at the time of the transaction. Patricia had contacted Reeves through counsel. Reeves requested time to review the documents with his attorney before making any statement, which Patricia noted was not the response of a man with nothing to hide, but it was also not the response of a man who had orchestrated the arrangement himself. Then she pulled up the deed records. One rental property, a house on Mercer that I knew as simply one of Corbett's investments, had a deed adjustment filed 7 years ago that required both spousal signatures based on how the property was originally titled. My signature was on the document. The notarization date was a Tuesday in February. Patricia's office had already requested my employment verification records from the medical practice. On that Tuesday, 7 years ago, I had worked a full day. 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. Signed in. Signed out. Documented. The signature on that deed was not made by me. Patricia said the word carefully. Forgery. Filed on a public property document. That became part of the civil complaint. Over the following week, Corbett retained an attorney, a man named Douglas Hatch, whose name Patricia said, with the particular flatness of someone who had dealt with him before, and found the experience unremarkable. Hatch sent Patricia a letter requesting a temporary pause in discovery proceedings while they reviewed the allegations and gathered financial records. Patricia declined, in writing, the next afternoon. About 2 weeks later, the Property Management Association sent Corbett a written request to step down from his committee seat, pending resolution of the legal matters. The letter framed it as voluntary. Patricia showed me a copy. Nothing about it was voluntary. I drove home in the dark, feeling the specific weight of evidence accumulating. Not satisfaction exactly, but something close to the feeling of solid ground after a long time walking on something that only appeared stable. My phone rang as I pulled into Bertrice's driveway. Patricia. She said she had finished reviewing all 4 insurance policies. 2 named me. 1 named Corbett's estate generally. The 4th, taken out in 2007, 1 year after Olivia was born, named Olivia specifically as the sole beneficiary. Not Corinne, not Renee. Olivia. Alone. Patricia laid it out for me Thursday morning with the same precision she brought to everything. A man who takes out a life insurance policy in 2007 and names a 1-year-old child as the sole beneficiary, not the child's mother, not a general estate designation. That specific child alone is making a statement. He is not making it publicly. He is not making it voluntarily in any courtroom or conversation. He is making it the way men like Corbett make the things they cannot say out loud, quietly, financially, in documents designed to be found only after he is gone and can no longer be questioned about them. Patricia said that kind of specificity mattered, not because it automatically proved paternity, it did not, but because it established intent. The will's structure, directing assets toward Corinne and her children, had until now been arguable as a general choice, unconventional but not automatically improper. The Olivia policy changed that argument. It suggested the financial structuring was not broad at all. It was focused, built around a specific child for a specific reason. That deliberateness, layered onto the forged deed and the 21 years of transfers, strengthened our position significantly. Then Patricia said something else. She said there was another possibility she wanted me prepared for before I spoke to anyone. Olivia herself might not know. I looked at her. Patricia said children raised inside long secrets often inherit the silence without understanding the architecture underneath it. Corbett may have protected Olivia financially while keeping the truth compartmentalized even from her. Men like him preferred controlled systems. Controlled systems required controlled information. I listened. I asked 2 clarifying questions. Then I told her I needed an hour before our next call. I drove to Bertrice's house where I had been staying, and I sat in the car in the driveway and found Corinne's number. I had 1 question. I did not need a conversation. I did not need another version of 1997. I needed 1 answer to 1 question, and then I would know exactly where I stood. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Does Olivia know who her father is?" The silence that followed was not short. It was the particular silence of a person deciding not whether to tell the truth, but whether they still had the option of not telling it. I waited. I did not fill the space. I had learned over the past 10 days that silence was one of the most useful things a woman could deploy. Then Corinne exhaled softly. And for the first time since any of this began, her voice sounded frightened. She said, "You need to ask your attorney about that." Then she ended the call. I held the phone in my lap and looked out the windshield at Bertrice's front yard. A sprinkler was running on the neighbor's lawn. An ordinary Thursday afternoon proceeding without reference to any of this. I had not needed Corinne to confess anything. I had needed to hear what she protected first, not Corbett, not herself. Olivia. That told me enough. I called Patricia and repeated Corinne's exact words. Patricia was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That's noted. We continue." That evening, I went home. Not to Bertrice's guest room. Home. The house on Sycamore where I had lived for 19 years. Where I had planted the garden and raised my children and set plates on the table for a man who had been conducting a separate life alongside this one for most of those years. Corbett had moved his things to the Caldwell property earlier in the week. His closet was half empty. The bathroom counter had gaps where his things had been. I walked through every room slowly, not looking for anything, just moving through my own space the way you move through something you almost lost and have not yet finished fighting to keep. Not triumphant, not relieved, present. This was still my house, my garden outside that window, my name on the mortgage. I was still here. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Dessa. She said, "Mama, Aunt Corinne called me today." Dessa was at my door by 9 Friday morning. She had driven straight from her apartment without calling first, which told me everything about the state she was in before she said a word. She came inside, sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Kashawn had sat 4 days ago, and she put both hands flat on the surface, the way people do when they need something solid beneath them. She said, "Aunt Corinne called me yesterday evening." I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her and waited. Dessa told me that Corinne had not opened with an apology. She had opened with context, the word Dessa used, and I noted it, because context was precisely the frame Corinne would choose. She wanted Dessa to understand the sequence before she formed a judgment. She wanted to speak before the legal proceedings made speaking feel impossible. Corinne had told Dessa about 1997, not the version she had given me on Sunday, compressed, careful, delivered to a woman she knew was already assembling a case. The version she gave Dessa was fuller. She told her that what existed between her and Corbett had its own history, before my name was ever part of it. That she had stepped back when Corbett came to me. That she had made a choice she believed was right. She wanted Dessa to hold that. The fact that the relationship preceded the marriage, that Corinne had not reached into something already built and taken from it. Dessa looked at me across the table when she said this. She was not delivering it as a defense of Corinne. She was delivering it as information, the way her mother had taught her to receive hard things, straight, without flinching, before deciding what to do with it. Then she told me the part that mattered most. Corinne had told her that Corbett came to me already knowing. He had stood at that altar carrying the full weight of what existed between him and Corinne, and he had made a choice not to end it, not to resolve it, but to begin my marriage with the secret already built into its foundation. He did not stumble into betrayal 2 years in. He walked into our marriage carrying it. I did not speak for a moment. I thought about the wedding. October 1999. The church on 5th Avenue where my mother cried and Corinne stood 3 feet away in a dress the color of champagne and smiled at me with my own face. I thought about Corbett at the end of that aisle, certain, composed, the man I believed I was choosing. He had looked at my face and seen the echo of another face, and he had made his calculation, and he had said, "I do." The 2 halves of one face, and he had chosen the half that did not know. I did not say that to Dessa. Some things belong only to the woman carrying them. Dessa set down her coffee cup. She looked at me directly and said, "I want you to know where I stand, not because you need me to choose, but because I've thought about it and I've decided. I'm with you, not against him because he's my father, with you because of who you are and what you've done, and what you didn't deserve. I looked at my daughter, 24 years old, clear-eyed, certain in the way that only people who have genuinely examined something can be certain. I said, "I know." She nodded. We sat together for a while in the quiet of the kitchen. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. I said, "I'm ready to move on the will directly." Patricia filed on Monday morning. She called me at 9:15 to confirm it was done. Fraudulent concealment of marital assets. Undisclosed beneficiary structuring tied to the marital estate. Potential forgery of my signature on the 2018 property notarization. A petition to freeze further asset transfers pending civil review. 4 grounds. Formal. Filed in Jefferson County Civil Court before Corbett finished his morning coffee. By then, nearly 3 months had passed since the birthday party. Discovery had already begun moving quietly behind the scenes. Bank responses, deed records, insurance reviews, employment verification, attorney correspondence. Patricia wanted the timeline documented carefully. Courts moved slower than anger did. She reminded me of that often. Patricia explained something carefully after she filed. Corbett was alive, which meant this was not technically a probate fight yet, no matter how much of it centered around the will he had already drafted. What she filed was designed to stop him from moving money, reshaping property, or restructuring his estate further while discovery was underway. The probate issues would come later if they needed to. Right now, the fight was about concealment, fraud, and marital assets. Douglas Hatch responded by Wednesday. His response said nothing, which is to say it was composed entirely of procedural language, requesting additional time for review and proposing a temporary pause in discovery, while both sides evaluated settlement options. Patricia declined in a letter that took her 11 minutes to write. She told me that with some satisfaction. 10 days later, Gerald Reeves called Patricia's office. His attorney made the call, but the message was Reeves himself. He had reviewed the 2018 transaction with counsel and determined that his continued exposure was not worth protecting, an arrangement he had not fully understood when he entered it. He would cooperate with a deposition. He would testify truthfully about how the transaction was structured and at whose direction. Patricia called me after and said simply, "Reeves is not a problem anymore." What she meant was that Corbett had structured that transfer to make himself look asset poor on paper, and now the man who had been the other side of that transaction was going to say so under oath. Over the next several weeks, the consequences started arriving quietly. Corbett resigned his committee seat with the Property Management Association. The letter was framed as voluntary. The resignation was not. A small business owner who leased commercial space in one of Corbett's properties, a man named Curtis, who had been at the birthday party and had stood in my living room and heard every word I said, chose not to renew his lease when it came due the following month. He sent no explanation. He simply left. In Corbett's world, where reputation was the currency that kept everything else moving, that silence had a specific cost. My phone rang Saturday evening. Corbett's number. I looked at it for one full ring. Then I pressed record and answered. His voice was different. Not the composure of the restaurant, not the practiced fluency of a man managing his exposure. He sounded tired in the specific way of someone who has not slept properly in weeks and has run out of the energy required to perform being fine. He said, "I never wanted it to go like this." I said nothing. He asked me if there was anything left between us worth saving. He did not say it like a strategy. He said it like a man standing at the edge of something irreversible, looking down, asking a question he already knew the answer to, but needed to say out loud anyway. I was quiet for a moment. I thought about the hallway. I thought about the word fool in his mouth. I thought about 25 years of dinners and Christmases and Sunday mornings, and the card in the MISC file written in my sister's handwriting. Then I said, You should have asked me that before you opened the will. I ended the call. I stopped the recording. One-party consent in Alabama. Patricia had confirmed that months earlier when the first hostile calls began coming in after the party. I had known it when I saw his name on the screen and reached for record first. I sent the file to Patricia that night. The following Monday, Hatch submitted a formal settlement proposal. Patricia called me as soon as it arrived. She said the document included a structured financial provision for Olivia, framed carefully, worded obliquely, but structured in a way that only made sense in one context. Patricia walked me through the settlement proposal, line by line. The Olivia provision was buried in the third section, framed as a charitable designation to a named individual. Language designed to look like generosity rather than obligation. But Patricia had been doing this long enough to read what documents meant underneath what they said. She laid it out plainly. A structured, ongoing financial arrangement for a specific 19-year-old woman, designated by name, with a payment schedule that extended over 12 years, does not exist in a settlement offer unless the man making the offer has a biological reason to feel permanently responsible for that person. It was not a sworn confession. It would never appear in any court record as an admission. But in the careful, oblique language of that document, Corbett had come as close to writing it down as a man like him would ever come. I asked Patricia what it meant for our position. She said it strengthened the fraud argument in the most significant way possible, because the will, the insurance policy, the 21 years of transfers, and now this provision were no longer a collection of separate questionable decisions. They were a pattern, a deliberate, documented, decade-spanning pattern of structuring marital assets around a child he had concealed from me. That was not a man making complicated choices. That was a man running a system. I told her to reject the settlement, push forward with the full evidentiary complaint. She said she would file in the morning. I drove home. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet on weekday evenings when the people who used to fill them are gone. Not empty, exactly, but rearranged. I set my bag on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment. Then I sat down and called my mother. Not for information, not for strategy. I called because I am 50 years old and I had been carrying this alone for 3 weeks, and I needed my mother's voice. I told her everything. Not the legal version, the real version. Corbett's voice in the hallway. The card in the MISC file. Dessa's hands on Kashan's at this table. The settlement document with Olivia's name structured into it like a quiet confession. I talked for a long time and my voice did things I had not allowed it to do in 23 days, and I did not correct it. I was done managing myself for an audience that was not there. My mother listened without interrupting. She has always known how to hold silence the way some people hold a hand. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Corinne has been punishing herself for this for 20 years. I could see it. I didn't know what I was seeing, but I could see it." She paused. That's not an excuse, but it's something. I sat with that. It did not change my course. It did not soften the filing or reduce what I was owed or make the 21 years of transfers feel smaller. What it did was give me something I had not allowed myself since the night I stood in that hallway. The ability to see Corinne as a woman who had made a choice and had been living inside the weight of it, rather than simply as a category of person I needed to move around. That did not make her innocent. It made her human, and I was done carrying the cost of other people's humanity instead of my own. I ended the call. I sat in the kitchen in the quiet of my own house. Tomorrow, Patricia would file. Tonight, I let myself feel the specific grief of 25 years that had been real. The love that was real. the children that were real, the life that was real, even when the man at the center of it was not entirely who I had believed. I grieved it, fully, completely. Then I was done. The civil proceedings took just over 4 months. I will not walk through every motion and counter-motion and procedural delay that Hatch attempted and Patricia dismantled. What I will tell you is the outcome, because the outcome is what matters, and the outcome is what I built. The marital home was awarded to me in full as part of the final settlement agreement and asset division. My name was already on the deed. Now it was the only name. I stayed in the house. The $340,000 in concealed transfers was ruled dissipation of marital assets during settlement negotiations, backed by discovery findings. 40%, $136,000 before attorney fees and tax adjustments, was returned to the marital estate and allocated to me. Not all of it. Courts do not give you everything. Reality does not either. But enough. Enough to mean that 21 years of quiet transfers to my sister's account did not simply disappear into the life Corbett constructed without my knowledge. The 2018 commercial property transfer to Gerald Reeves, the below-market transaction that Reeves himself testified, was structured at Corbett's direction to reduce the apparent value of the marital estate, was partially unwound through court-supervised negotiation. I received a stake in the commercial property portfolio valued at approximately $180,000. Not liquid cash. Equity. Patricia explained the distinction carefully more than once. Reeves cooperated fully. He was not a villain. He was a man who had accepted a favorable deal without asking enough questions, and when asked to tell the truth about it, he did. 2 insurance policies named me as beneficiary. They paid as written. The 4th policy, the one taken out in 2007, the one that named Olivia alone, I did not challenge. I want to say that plainly because it was a decision, and decisions deserve to be stated clearly. Olivia is 19 years old. She did not choose Corbett as her father. She did not choose any of the architecture that was built around her before she was old enough to understand what architecture was. And by the end of proceedings, Corbett's legal positioning around her had made the relationship sufficiently clear without forcing a separate public paternity fight that would have dragged her through courtrooms and filings. I was not going to use a child to settle a score with the man who made her. That was not weakness. That was a line I drew for myself, and I drew it cleanly. As part of the settlement, Corbett was required to execute revised estate documents with full financial disclosure attached to the agreement. Whatever he writes now, he writes knowing there is a legal record behind it. What I walked away with. The house, $136,000 in recovered assets before costs. A commercial property stake worth $180,000. And my name on everything he spent years trying to quietly move beyond my reach. Approximately $480,000 in assets and recovery, in addition to the home I was already standing in. Corbett and Corrine exist somewhere in this city. Their relationship is no longer a secret, and Birmingham is not a large place. I understand there have been consequences. Social, professional, familial. I do not track them. I made a decision somewhere around the 3rd month of proceedings to stop spending energy watching what was happening to the people who had wronged me and redirect it entirely toward what I was building. That decision cost me nothing and returned everything. Dessa and Kashawn are still processing. They will be for a long time. That is honest. Families do not resolve the way legal settlements resolve, cleanly, with signatures and dates. They move forward unevenly with setbacks and silences and occasional dinners where everyone tries. We are doing that. It is enough. I am standing at my kitchen sink. The same window. The garden outside that I planted the second year of my marriage because a man told me he liked roses, and I believed that meant something about the kind of man he was. The roses are still there. I maintained them then, and I maintain them now, and they have nothing to do with him anymore. They are just mine. Everything is different. I am the same woman. I am not. He called me a fool. In front of his friends, in his living room, in the house where I cooked his meals and raised his children and kept his life running for 25 years. He called me a fool. I want him to know, if he ever says my name again, that the fool he described walked into court, put her name back on everything he tried to quietly move away from her, and walked back out. That is not what fools do. That is what I did.